Hi, I'm Mark Madison, and I'm the historian at the National Conservation Training Center here in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And today we have a very special guest, David Conover. David, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Mark.
David's out here for our first symposia on humanities and the environment. So you're here for a beta test of a new project we're doing in conjunction with Shepherd University. But you've been out here before with our filmmakers workshop, I think, and the film festival. And before we talk about your most recent film, I'd like just to tell people a little bit about you, because you had a very interesting trajectory. Hasn't been a straightforward path, has it, to filmmaking. David was born and raised in New England, and he has strong ties to the sea, which still persist in some of his films. Both your grandfathers were filmmakers in the 20s and 30s. What type of filmmakers were they, David?
Really just the home camera, line up the kids
so you had
and
that
let
gene,
it go.
Yep, and upon graduating with a degree in comparative religious studies from Bowdoin College, you worked as a professional seaman, including 2 transatlantic crossings in small boats, which is fascinating. Then you spent 5 years designing and teaching sea courses for students, young students, high school students it looks like, at the Hurricane Island Outward Bound School in Maine and Florida, followed by a master's degree in education at Harvard, where you studied moral development, and then a second year at the Kennedy School, teaching in leadership studies. In 1987, you finally seemed to move into your niche as a filmmaker, producing your first documentary, Outward Bound, which aired on National Geographic Explorer. Then you founded the production company, Compass Light, now in its 25th year. Congratulations. And Compass Light's a pretty interesting company. It focuses on outdoors, the ocean, environmental themes. It's made over 600 award-winning productions delivered to clients and producers. It's quite a lot. I'm surprised you had time to even come out here. But you do have a crew, and some of their
Thank God.
clients have been the Discovery, Science Channel, PBS, Nova, among others. We've been listed as a top 100 global production company by Real Screen, which is an important industry magazine. Then in early 2015, as if you weren't busy enough, you founded the Conservation Media Group, which I find very interesting because this is one of our challenges. This group builds communication capacity for work targeting urgent ocean and energy challenges via workshops, residency grants, placement of fellows with partner conservation organizations. Now that we're in charge of marine national monuments, we may need to tap you. And then you returned to academia, working in coastal studies scholar at Bowdoin College in Maine, and now you live in the incredibly beautiful Camden, Maine. So we appreciate you leaving Maine briefly to come out here for the end of this week and for our Humanities Environment Symposium. So thank you very much. And tonight, you're going to show us your newest film, Behold the Earth, a really interesting film, and I can honestly say in 15 years of selecting films, a totally unique film. I haven't seen a film like this before, and I thought we'd open with just a little trailer so viewers can get a sense of what this film is like.
Sounds great.
Beholding is very different than taking a look at something. When you first look at a beetle or first look at a flower, and you do it as a child, you can look very, very closely and for very, very long periods of time.
I think that science has become so unique and so powerful that it's a threat.
Haunted is an easy word.
So as Christians, we're trying to figure out what does it mean to be faithful given the reality that we find ourselves in today.
We have Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And all put together is a very dangerous mix. are they American? What are Americans? They are the most religious people of an industrialized country in the world.
There is a very strong ethical fiber that runs through science and the scientific community that says you report only what really is there. Now, where did we get that core? That's a good question. I think it has a lot to do with our religion and our religious capital from previous generations.
If we harness this knowledge, this conviction that we ought to have, we can be a very powerful force.
So very important that we strive to have better self-understanding as a species of who we are and where we want to go. And we can't do that without a dialogue between science and religion, the two most powerful forces in the world.
Having just rewatched the film, the trailer gives a nice sense of it, the major speakers. So tell us the path you took to make this film.
Well, let's see. I would say I did study, as you mentioned, comparative religion as an undergraduate in school. Mm-hmm. And I would say I would describe myself as a religious person, but not necessarily, and have not, other than when I was a small child, been in a faith community. But I grew up, very much connected to the outdoors, and I really had that feeling of bigness that I think is articulated very well in a lot of the world's religions. So I was aware of that. I went to the Copenhagen climate change talk in 2009, I believe, 2010. There was a lot of hope. There was a possibility that the world's leaders were going to come together and actually, make something happen there. And it didn't. It didn't happen. And there was a big letdown. And I went back and thought, this language of science has limits when it comes to dealing with certain problems, perhaps, because the science for dealing with that particular environmental issue was fairly well established around the world and in the scientific literature. And yet, there was something else that kept that science from being enacted as public policy. So I thought, this is maybe a problem looking for another language, and to complement, not necessarily displace, the findings of science. And that got me thinking about it. I had the opportunity, someone approached me with a commission to do a story. Initially, the idea was to do something about Rachel Carson, who I love.
We would have had you come to our archives. We have our library and all the
I know,
fish and wildlife stuff.
That's great. And she spent a lot of time in Maine, so there was that connection too. But
far from where you are now.
That's right. And I was very interested in that, but I also thought about this question that I had, really formed in my mind at Copenhagen, and I thought, maybe there's a different set of people I could talk with. And I had, at that same time, read a book by E.O. Wilson, renowned biologist, called The Creation, structured as a letter to a pastor. And he said, we really ought to work on getting along. We have a lot of common overlap, and there may be some areas where we disagree, but I think a dialogue is essential. And I read that and said, yeah, this is right. So I started my line of inquiry with him, and I was essentially interested in talking with biologists and with Christians who were working to take care of creation, to take care of the natural world.
Where did the title come from?
Well, initially,
I watched the film again. I missed that part somehow.
Yeah. Well, as I talk with people, and I was asking a lot of questions. That's, I do wear a teacher hat sometimes, but I wear a filmmaker hat, and they're very different hats. Generally, if I figure to make a film with the intent you're going to teach something, it usually is not a very entertaining film. So I'm very much in a kind of student mode when I'm making a film. And as I went to talk with different leading evangelical Christians, and with Ed Wilson and with Theo Colburn and with Cal DeWitt, who's both a great scientist, but also a leader of the creation care movement, an architect in the United States. You know, I was all ears, I was listening, and it really, you know, the word behold kept coming up. And my initial reaction to it is, this is kind of an old world word, you know.
King James
yeah,
type word,
you know,
yeah.
maybe something you'd find in an old,
Right.
you know, tomb somewhere. But I think it was Cal DeWitt who said, you know, really think about that word behold. You know, it's be, it's hold, it's kind of together. It really, you know, and I said, yeah, that's really it. It's that moment of engagement, you know, whether it's a scientist looking at a new species, you know, where you really look at it and you're trying to understand it, or a poet, Walt Whitman, you know, he was renowned for that ability to identify with life. It just felt like, you know, as a filmmaker, I could really understand that because, you know, you look at things and you see how they're lit and so on. But I could really see it in the world of science and in the world of Christianity, and I thought this might be a good basis for asking these questions and seeing
It's
how
a
it turns
nicely
out.
evocative title. Now, the ecologists you talked to, familiar with all of them, I did not know, besides Ed Wilson because of his new book, I know Theo as a potential successor to Rachel Carson. She came out here for a Rachel Carson conference. And Cal DeWitt, I know from ecological work in Madison and so on. How did you pick which ecologist you were going to talk to?
Well, yeah, it was really, you know, Wilson and Theo and Cal, Catherine Hayhoe, who is a physical scientist. She's really coming out of the physical sciences, so she's not an ecologist. Ben Lowe really started, you know, in his 20s. He went to Wheaton, and he really kind of jumped into the idea of, you know, acting on taking care of the environment, taking care of creation, initially, you know, as a virtue, as an expression of his faith. And as he got into it, he realized, you know, you need more than just being virtuous. You need some knowledge if you're really going to actually see what's going on out there and know how to take care of it. I think he ran across something that Wendell Berry had written that said, you know, virtue itself is not enough. You also need skill. So he went back to school, and actually was going back to school when I found him. So he was in that very interesting point
Cool.
of becoming an ecologist.
Yeah.
And then Karina Newsom, who's our youngest, 24 years old, grew up in Philadelphia. You know, most amazing story, you know, for me. She was not surrounded by open space. She was not surrounded by the outdoors. And her point of contact initially as a child was a slug on the brick wall of her building. And she went out and she would spend hours each day just watching these slugs, watching their little slime trails and, you know, how they responded to changes in temperature and humidity. And she said she didn't see a blue jay until she was taking an ornithology class as a freshman in college.
Oh my God.
And I mean, can you imagine? And so, but she fell in love. She realized this really is my passion. So she went on to become a biology major, and is now working at the Nashville Zoo. So I found her actually through a short video that she had done with a group that Ben Lowe had started, and I just listened to her online, and I thought she has a story.
You truly are a student when you're a filmmaker.
Yeah.
How about the Christian groups? How did you find your Christian spokesperson?
Well,
from the evangelical community and so on.
Yeah, I think Ed Wilson had told me about Cal DeWitt, but it wouldn't take far to not see him, because he's fairly, you know, he's
very prominent in ecological circles and the caretaker movement.
Yeah, and he is you know, he's a wonderful storyteller, and you can just tell that he's one of those teachers that for every student he's with, you know, they remember him. And he uses the marsh in his backyard right behind the house where he lives with his wife Ruth, and you know, he's a real observant and, you know, thoughtful, wonderful person, and you feel it. So I had a sense of that from his writing and from people who had talked with him, but when I actually went out and met with him, I realized, yeah, he's he really is the guy to talk with.
He actually had my favorite quote in the film, where he talked
What
about
was that?
ecology being more of an activity than a science, and putting your whole body and your soul into it. I thought that was a nice connection between religion and ecology, actually. Yeah, he's a very articulate spokesperson.
Yeah, I think that was an important point, because I think oftentimes people look at science as an ideology,
Yeah.
not as a method or a way of learning something, but as something in and of itself, something more than a process. And I think he did. He spoke to that very well.
Now, you studied comparative religions, but you didn't compare that many religions in this film. Was that a conscious choice?
Well, you know, it's an
Are
interesting
there future
thing.
films in the works?
Yeah, I've thought about that. And you know, faith is practiced in many different ways for around the world, and in some ways, I think it really was a question of numbers. I knew that the evangelical faith, Christian faith in the United States was, according to the Pew survey on religion in American life, I think at 25% of Americans describe themselves as evangelicals. So, and I also felt like I didn't know much about that community, and I think as I realized, it's not even one community, it's quite a few different communities, and in different parts of the country, and politically, you know, across the spectrum. So that really was it, but it really could have been other faiths too. I think what I was really trying to get at with that word "behold" does exist in every faith, and I think you know, you could say, for example, in Buddhism, that there's a great appreciation of silence. Yep. There's a kind of Buddhist silent moment, but actually, I think all religions have that appreciation for silence, and there really isn't a Jewish silence or a Christian silence. There's just the silence of, you know, being alive and being outdoors that I think people who have spent a lot of time outdoors recognize. And so, yeah, that's maybe a long answer, but
That's a good one.
Yeah, I did want to connect, and I feel like the evangelical community has been very influential in American life. I think it's very distinctively engaged, you know, kind of in a very full way with, but also as Ben and others I began to talk with, don't actively and frequently consider the creation and taking care of it. So it felt like he said, you know, this is a really good community to focus on. I've been working in that way. Cal also encouraged it, and I did take a bit of leadership from their thought on that.
For the evangelicals and Christians in general, where are they getting their environmental ideology from? Is it from Genesis, or are they pulling from certain parts of Scripture? Or
Definitely in Scripture, and that you know, Genesis, Psalms, Revelations. There's a number of places, and that's very important that it is rooted in Scripture, as Cal describes. You know, it's this is the book, and he describes essentially a two-book theology, the book, the Bible, and what is written in there about the relationship between people and a world that was created, you know, for people, and this second book, which is the book of the creation or the outdoors, getting to know the species, getting to know what's there, and how it works, and you know, the hydrological systems, the way life lives on the planet. And knowing these two books, that was really his contribution, and that was an eye-opener for me. I thought, I hadn't heard of that.
As a historian, I can tell you that's got a long lineage. It goes back to St. Augustine, saying there's two books of nature. One is the Bible, and one is nature. And then Francis of Assisi and the whole Bacon natural theology. It had a long run, but that does raise the question today. It seems like there is less of a connection in general between ecology and religion. Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
What happened? It had a 1,500-year run where it was seen as the obvious thing to do, and it was. Heck, Darwin was trained as a theologian. You know, John Ray, everybody that came, Isaac Newton, these guys were all very religious and very scientific. And then your film, not to use a pun, but was kind of a revelation, you know, since then. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, I think something happened within the, and I'm going to speak more specifically about Christianity.
Sure.
But I think there was something happen in the Protestant Revolution where there was a sense that the meaning that we're going to find in the world is only going to be in Scripture initially. The creation care thing kind of came a little bit later, although, as you say, had been earlier as well. And I think there was a focus on that, and as there was, and then talking about the American Christian world, as there was a movement to North America of Europeans, I think there was a lot of focus on just kind of getting by. You know, you needed shelter, you needed, and it wasn't an easy process of getting by. So there was a little bit more of a adversarial relationship, and I don't think they picked up as much on the belief structures that were indigenous, that were more living with, you know, nature. And integrating that, I think that's a big piece of it. I don't know. That's a complicated. That's a good question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to spring it out. Because some of the Thoreau is heavily influenced by Buddhism. John Muir, his writings are very spiritual too, in kind of a transcendentalist way. So. Some of our conservation heroes that we have on the walls here and so on did have that spirituality, but it seems like in the later 20th century there's less of that. That's why E.O. Wilson's book kind of was a surprise to people.
I think there were a number of things happening. I mean, there's always been this distrust of kind of the material world in particularly probably Protestant Christianity. That on the one hand, you know, there's this incentive for those who are looking for, you know, material wealth as an expression of goodness, and there's that kind of prosperity gospel that's out there. But I also think there's a lot of focus on the next world and what happens after, and this and really saving souls and people with less of a focus on the rest of life.
That's interesting. We got a sense in your trailer that music is a big component of this film. How did you develop the soundtrack for it, which is a very unique soundtrack and innovatively presented for a documentary film?
Yeah, well, thanks. We had some great musicians working on the film. Dirk Powell is one instrumentalist, just an incredible musician from Louisiana, but he grew up in Kentucky. So he was very familiar with and came from a family that had science and also music involved. Rhiannon Giddens, and she's from North Carolina, and had a group called the North Carolina Chocolate Drops, or Carolina Chocolate Drops, excuse me. And she's a banjo player and very interested in African American history, and then Dirk's two daughters, who are young and had a voice, Tim Erickson, who was very involved with the shaped note tradition, which is really, and he was probably the one, and the shaped note tradition that really opened my eyes to how music fit into this experience of being outdoors, and feeling that you know, a religious person might recognize. And he told me some of the history, and he said that throughout the Great Awakening, you probably know the dates better than I, but I think it was late, like 1840s or 1870s, somewhere in there, around the Civil War. Throughout that period of revival, singing outdoors was a very common activity, and these were songs of praise, and they were expressions of that experience of vastness that people who spend time outdoors recognize and often feel, of the vast sky, of the vast open wood the ocean, the river, whatever it might be. And then in some places, like Maine, where I'm from, you could have 6,000 or 7,000 people on a summer weekend singing outdoors. They'd come together.
Yeah.
You know, it might be a Methodist camp in Northport, Maine, or Commons in Hope, Maine, and a lot of these Maine towns. There's hope, there's liberty, there's freedom, there's
Very patriotic.
yeah, and there'd be a lot of song. And there was one songbook in particular called The American Vocalists, which Tim Erickson showed me, and it was a collection of about 300 different hymns of praise, and it was put together by a fellow named D.H. Mansfield, who grew up in a town next to me, Hope, Maine. And Tim had worked with this book a lot, and he had been working with that process of singing, and which is known as the shaped note or sacred harp tradition. People get together. There's no instrumentation; it's just singing. So I knew that music, and obviously in a service structure, a liturgical structure, music is a very important time, where you hear someone talk for a while, and then you have a chance to sing and listen. And I knew music was going to be really important.
It's really an augment. I mean, lots of times there's a soundtrack and a backdrop of music, but yours pops into the story in a really interesting way. Have you thought about doing a CD?
We have.
You have.
We have. Yeah. It really is a distinctive body of music that exists there, and it's true. With my filmmaker hat on, music usually never has lyrics in the context of filmmaking. It's something that you should feel but not ever really notice. If you notice it, it's probably too strong. And we have a little bit of that music, but we really wanted to make that movement from silence, or just the sound of spoken word without music, to be very distinct. So it's either kind of there, in which case you're fully in with the music and lyrics for 2, 3, 4 minutes. And then you bow out. So it gives you a chance, I think, as a viewer to participate in a different way with the content, and in a way that really is right in line with what that content is.
It's a relatively new film. When did you complete it?
It is new. We've had, I think tonight will be our 4th screening.
We're honored. Thanks for doing it. So this is going to be a tough question because it hasn't screened that much, but the places it has screened, what has the audience reaction been?
Well, the first screening we did was at the DC Environmental Film Festival, which is a wonderful festival in Washington that happens every March. And lots of filmmakers come together, and lots of different communities, and it was screened. We didn't know what it was going to evoke. And boom, we went right into a Q&A session that was incredibly lively, and people talking in a way that had a degree of intimacy and kind of grounding that comes when you really get into a good moral conversation. And by moral I mean really speaking from a person's deepest thoughts. And people would stand up. They stood up in that movie theater and they said, this really spoke to me. I've had this conversation in my head, my faith and my science, and I haven't. In some ways, I've seen how they've gone together. In many ways, I have not. And someone stood up down front and said, we should work together. and one was a secularist, and one was from the faith community, and then 2 or 3 other people started that conversation. Also afterwards. So that was
probably the
feeling.
exact type of reaction you want to get from an audience, and you'll get a positive one tonight because it's a good example of crossing the sciences with other disciplines, basically, which is our point with the environmental symposium. What message or lesson do you want people to take from the film, if any?
Well, I think it's we are, as many people have said, we're in this kind of period in American history right now. I think where we're very polarized, and I really strongly feel that there are certain ideas that really can unite us, and we need to revisit those continually. I also think there are certain feelings of I think probably being in that vastness of North America for the Europeans early on who brought Christianity, I think that feeling is also a uniter for parts of our society. And so I think trying to be able to make sense of what that feeling is and recognize that it's a common thing and that we can have conversations on the basis of that common feeling, or to find out how maybe it could be expressed in other belief traditions. But I do think there's a kind of grounding there that's very human, that's very important. I would say the film is probably targeted more towards that evangelical group, so I really hope that the conversations that Ben Lowe and others that we talked with, that this film will help them, within that community, address some of those questions and hopefully address it at a deeper and kind of more action-oriented level than they have in the past.
And yet, ironically, it's showing at environmental film festivals. Are there the equivalent?
Well,
religious
just
film
to
festivals?
start, actually, really, the venues that we're seeking mostly will be churches for this. And the question, can a church also serve as a cinema? We're going to try that one out.
Good luck with the sound. Let's shift gears a bit. 25 years or so ago, you founded Compass Light. What was its mission?
Really, it was when we first got going, we were doing a lot of expeditionary films. So it was really, the goal was to make films and explore the relationship of people and the outdoors, and particularly the ocean. The expedition was really the most common narrative storyline. You had
Since Odysseus.
that's right, beginning, middle, and end. So it's great for storytelling kind of.
And how'd you pick the name?
Compass
I suspect
Light.
it has a nautical
Yeah,
derivation.
there is. On mid-sized to small boats where you have a compass outside and you're steering from outside, not inside a pilot house. At night there is a light that shines out on that compass, and you can't see much oftentimes, but or stars, and you can steer by the stars when you can see them. But when you can't, it's really what you have to go on. I just thought it was open enough and kind of had that.
Sketchy.
There's also a practical part. I mean, part of me is a strong pragmatist, so the idea that you actually, you need a little bit of light to figure out where you're going.
You have a plot.
and films involve light, so that was it.
Yeah, okay, cool. One of the films Compass Light made was about one of our refuges, Okefenokee. It was part of a series, Big Picture Earth. Tell us a little about the Okefenokee film, because I think our audience would be interested in that one.
Yeah, well, boy, making that film was the first time I had been down to Okefenokee, and just going into that vast stretch of southern Georgia, northern Florida, the black water, that sense of time, of detritus from the leaves and trees that would fall and soak in and then kind of underwater form that peat. And I'm a real sucker for those things that have taken centuries or millennia to form. And I look at them and I go, wow, my God, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years ago. I don't think it went back that far, but just that whole process and how you can see that and feel that in the Okefenokee. The film itself it's about 30 minutes, and there's no spoken word.
Right. Truly an international film. Anybody can watch this.
That's right. Anyone can watch it. It's very experiential. The series, Big Picture Earth, we did 20 episodes, each 30 minutes, and we visited different, very distinctive places like Okefenokee. And then we wander through them. The camera never stops. It's constantly moving, and it's moving at about the height of a child's eye, which was deliberate. The series itself was inspired by a Whitman poem, There Was a Child Went Forth.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we just kind of wandered through the Okefenokee.
Well, how did your camera work in the Okefenokee? Were you in a boat of some sort?
We were in a boat, and for a lot of it, most of it, you do need to be in a boat. But there's some areas where you can get out and walk around, and
There's a little boardwalk.
there's some great,
part of it.
yeah, and going in canoeing or with a small outboard, it's really incredible. Every corner you turn around, you have these trees coming down on the moss, and so it was really that movement. We did 2 versions of it, one which is all with natural sound, and one which is with music.
Okay.
So kind of.
I saw the music one.
You saw the music. Okay.
I'd like to see the other one. I also read on your website that you're increasingly doing work with unmanned aerial vehicles, which we call drones.
Yeah.
But tell us about that.
Well, it's from a filmmaking perspective, it's a great platform because you can kind of enter that low altitude space that's lower than what you can access with a fixed wing aircraft or a helicopter, higher than what you can reach up for, and really move it around in a very controlled way, usually. So yeah, from a filmmaking perspective, it's a great thing. I from a non-filmmaking perspective, I don't like the sound of them. They're very disruptive. So I'm a little bit at mixed opinions about drones. I think it's they've made progress with how to work it so that it's not infringing on people's experience in a negative way, but also. And it's not just filmmaking. I mean, it can also do great creature counts and other things from the air that you really just can't see. So it's an interesting new technology. I think they're here. They're going to be here for a long time. I think we should be very deliberate about how we use them. I'm not a all ahead on drones kind of.
We're using them in Africa for anti-poaching, actually, which is kind of a clever, newish way of using them.
Yeah, we've lost 3 drones.
You're not doing bad.
Yeah, we lost one off the coast of Iceland that just went off to sea and decided, there be dragons and we're going to keep going.
Proper Viking funeral somewhere.
Yeah, one was, I think, down in the Panama Canal, and then one was a political issue in, I think, a Serbian was shooting in Croatia, or vice versa, Croatians shooting in Serbia. And
they shot you down?
No, it was, it was just in the wrong place. So but they do attract attention, and they have this kind of lightning rod capacity for if someone doesn't like a piece of what you're doing, that drone is the reason why.
Okay. Well, a lot of your films have had dealt with the ocean, and why has that been a particular interest to you?
Well, I grew up, my folks, my mother and my father were both very focused on the ocean. They just loved hanging out next to it on small boats. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and when we were all in our teens, I was in my early 20s, they decided they wanted to take a long trip, so we sailed across the Atlantic. That was one of the small boats, in a 36-foot boat. I just have always been around them, and I think it's that, and I did have a big discovery. I mean, I'd been focused on the surface for probably up until I was 24, and shortly around that point, I realized there's this whole other world underneath.
Sure.
And that was a huge eye-opener, and to realize it's really, we're only 3 generations, away from the real beginning of scuba. It's just, our ability to actually see underwater, it's our great-grandfathers and not much before that.
Right. Jacques Cousteau and these guys were pioneers in that.
So when you think of like the big history of time, we're really in that like baby step period of looking down there. And
is it particularly challenging to film in the oceans as a filmmaker?
Yeah. You have a lot more gear, scuba. So, you might be traveling overseas with a crew. Typically, you might have 10 or 12 bags, and for an underwater shoot, you're easily over 40.
Right.
So, it can really add a lot with housing. It's a little bit easier now that the media is digital. When we were shooting with, big rolls of film, when I got going, that was a couple of cases just with the film stock. But it's challenging and it's expensive. I think, and the stories are, greatly in need of expanding. They have been kind of told in a similar way. You can almost, if you think of or imagine what the music track might be for an underwater film,
Right.
It's got a certain pace, and so I think there's some fundamental kind of storytelling opportunities for revisiting it. But the real thing for me is the beauty. Yes, it's there, but it's really also witnessing how it's changing. And you know, what I've seen in the last 35 years has been huge changes. And you know, the amount of fish that there was, what's now, we're really having an impact on this
Oh yeah.
this ocean. And it's hard to just continue telling stories of how beautiful it is, you know, with that knowledge. So we started this group about 3 years ago called Conservation Media Group. And the idea was to use media to help build capacity, communication capacity, with groups working on the ocean. And in particular, we're looking at the question of providing sanctuary for marine life, and also plastics in the ocean, which actually, when you get into it, is really a plastics on land issue that ends up in the ocean. So we've been, you know, working with a number of different groups and individual filmmakers who are merging and trying to pair them together and, you know, get them a head start towards. These filmmakers are younger filmmakers, so they have, in many cases, 40 or 50 years of a working life ahead of them, and you know, set them off and see what good they can do.
Have you done anything on Midway? That's right in the middle of the Pacific garbage dump. We have huge issues of albatrosses and so on.
What's found inside the albatross? No, our group has not. There have been some good work done out there. I think the photographer Chris Jordan has done some great work. We were working most recently with the format, the VR format, you know, the cameras that can look in all 360 degrees. And this was an idea for a project using that format that came out of England. And so one of our grantees was a guy named Danny Copeland. And he decided he was going to cover mobilids. I didn't know what a mobilid was.
No,
at the
you
beginning.
might want to tell the audience and me.
Well, it's kind of the rays. It's
all
the
right.
family of rays. And the manta ray, I think technically it's not a mobile, but there are smaller rays like the manta that are considered mobilids, and they're heavily fished, increasingly so, particularly in Asia. And so there was an initiative to try to list them as a CITES listing, which would help protect them internationally. So this young filmmaker, and he was probably, when he started, maybe 21, said, I want to do this experience where I go down with rays underwater with this 360 camera to give that kind of visceral experience of these rays swimming through this vastness, and show it to the delegates who are going to cast their vote as to whether this regulation should pass. And that year it was in South Africa. And he didn't do it alone. He worked with Pew Charitable Trust. But together they got a number of delegates to experience this just before going in.
What a great idea.
And it passed, which was not solely because of the media. Most of it really was the footwork that Pew had been doing. But it helped. And that's one of the things we're finding, is that it's not film alone, but it's film in conjunction, in partnership with a campaign or a program that can really lead to healthy oceans.
That sounds like a great idea. We need you to follow more of our endangered and threatened species to give us a boost on that out there.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of it, you know, messaging is important, and you know, we are really storytelling creatures, and sometimes the facts, sometimes the science, as critical, really central, you need that, absolutely, but what goes along with that science in terms of communicating it to people, story is a very important piece of it.
As are visuals. One of the striking things is, because I started as a scientist, how little traditionally life scientists have used visuals to convey their findings and so on. It didn't always used to be that way, but it does seem, as opposed to other fields, maybe we could make more use of visuals and work with people that actually know how to create them to more effectively get out the message.
Yeah, I think so. I think there has been a lot that's been done in the last particularly 10 or 15 years, different ways to be able to see something that you know, you otherwise wouldn't be able to see. I don't think it's a replacement. I think it's, I mean, I find that it's really, really important for me to read. I think reading has to be a part of every visualist's kind of world. And but yeah, all these different pieces come together.
In Behold the Earth and some of the other projects you talked about, but definitely in Behold the Earth, I noticed there was an emphasis on young people, getting them introduced to the outdoors. And it's something we've been struggling with a lot recently. And I wonder if you have had any successes or any ideas on how to get youth who are increasingly urbanized and so on today. We talked about earlier, you know, we worked with people who didn't have a lot of experience with nature, but ways to get young people jazzed about nature.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from the get-go, from the beginning, it's really important to not see it as a new thing for youth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's great comfort, I think, in recognizing that their connection to life that's out in the woods, life that's out, you know, in the oceans, is a very old connection. It's a connection they may not consciously have processed in the course of the 15 years or however many years they've lived, but it's in them. And it's in them at such a deep level that it's more a process of rediscovering than it is inventing something or trying to start something from scratch. So that's, I think, frames the questions and the techniques that you use to engage them. It's, you don't have to really do much. I don't think it's getting them in a place where they feel relatively safe, mm-hmm. and with something that's at a scale that is not overwhelming. And, you know, they can
so
engage
you're not shooting
that.
IMAX or anything?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, and I think media is a piece of that, but I am, you know, for me, media plays the role of kind of the smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And I love it, and for me, that smoke and mirrors has a kind of excitement and fire to it. But I think for most people, it's smoke and mirrors, and the real fire is something else that generates that smoke. And you have to always be aware that they're different from each other, and that kids, when they connect in the outdoors, they're connecting with that real fire. And it may be okay at times to have this kind of augmented reality with a cell phone and kind of go back and forth, but I think that is really important, just to have those moments, and it is more challenging. I mean, yeah. I remember talking with a friend parenting at the same time we were parenting our kids, and his kid said, yeah, well, when he was saying, well, you should spend more time outdoors, and his son said, yeah, but you know, the indoors wasn't that interesting when you were a kid.
They're right. I grew up with 2 channels on the TV.
Yeah. So.
But the outdoors remains interesting.
It does. That's the thing, and I think it's you know, it does call for maybe a little more patience. But you know, people are maybe getting more and more ready to slow down a little bit. And, you know, things are moving pretty quick these days, and it can feel pretty nice to slow down.
First time we had you out here was for the Filmmakers Workshop for the American Conservation Film Festival, and you also, in your day job, work with younger filmmakers. Do you have any advice you give them? You've made a lot of films, and you've done everything from writing, directing, producing, cinematographer. What do you tell younger filmmakers?
Well, you know, you need 2 things. You need capacity. You do need to know how to do it and how to do it well. And you don't want to put out work that doesn't look really good or is lit well or, you know, sounds. So there's certain kind of capacity, craft-related requirements. Uh-huh. But you also really need purpose. And to have capacity without purpose is not going to make very interesting films. And you also need to be making them yourself. You know, it is a collaborative endeavor. Right. When I say yourself, you know, you need to get a team. I think we had, for Behold the Earth, maybe over 100 different people were involved in that production.
No wonder it took so long.
I know. But so there's this need to work as a team and need to kind of solve problems, creative problems as a team. But it's really important to find a smaller scale project that you can work on and that you're kind of primarily the author of, and get that feeling, because I think that's really important in terms of like keeping that balance between capacity and purpose. If you don't have it with your own purpose, you know, you're going to fall into someone else's purpose, and that may eventually lead you down a path where you're not as fulfilled.
What's your purpose?
That's a good question. For me, it's really trying to, you know, I would like to imagine a world and work towards this world where my daughter, my son, my grandchildren have that experience of the outdoors that's as close as I did, you know, as close as it could be to what I had. See the same kinds of creatures, you know, experience life at a similar kind of pace. I just have always felt that relationship is incredible. Media can bring people into that relationship. So can a lot of other things. There's great work being done, you know, here and across the country and introducing people to the outdoors. But I firmly believe that if we, with all these tools, can get people out there and experiencing it, that we have a chance of making that future.
Well, David, I think that's a perfect, eloquent ending with a charge for all of us to try to keep the world as good as it was, or even better. We enjoyed it, and pass it on to our kids. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming out to share your film with us this evening. We're looking forward to seeing it, and really appreciate this conversation. And thanks to all of you for tuning in, and we'll see you during our next distance broadcast.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.